YouTube was feeding me a lot of spiritual awakening things. I see this video where there's a young man who had a near-death experience. That hate in his heart was a problem, and he couldn't stay on the other side. He had to come back and learn some more lessons. And I watched that, and I was like, wow, that is me. I am at the point where I am so against this, that, or the other thing that I think in judgment. I'm in judgment of those things that I don't agree with. And so getting past that was like one of the two big pieces of my spiritual awakening.
Welcome to the Awaken Magazine podcast, where we feature inspiring leaders who are helping our world awaken to love. I'm your host, David Trotter, and today I want to share with you an amazing conversation with Martin Lewis. He's a contributing author in our brand new anthology book, Awakened Hearts, which you can get at awakenedheartsbook.com. Now, in this conversation with Martin, he talks all about how in the midst of his baptism, he felt this connection with Source and then a connection with the Order of Melchizedek, which he has felt from that point forward. He talks about his 25 years in the military and how that impacted his life holistically and how it even impacted him spiritually. And then he shares this profound story of being on vacation with his family, watching a near-death experience video, and how that opened him up to an awakening. You've got to hear how that profoundly impacted his life just in the past year. Yeah. Hey, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Awaken Magazine podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Spotify. Click subscribe, leave a rating or review. That's an easy way for you to help us spread the word about these incredible interviews that we release each and every week. All right, let's dive into this conversation with Martin Lewis. Martin, it's great to be with you today, my friend. How are you doing? Good to see you.
Hey, David, I'm doing great. It's great to be here.
Good, good. You know, we got a chance to meet in person. You actually saw me at probably not one of my best moments in Sedona a number of months back. I'm trying to take the Awaken Magazine boxes up this hill and they're dropping all over the place. You were so gracious. You were so caring. I really appreciated that. But one of the things as I read your Awaken Hearts chapter and just get to know you a little bit, one of the things that I'm starting to appreciate about you is you seem to have kind of a broad perspective of what's going on in our planet. And so I'm just curious from your perspective, as you see the things that are unfolding around the world, what do you sense is happening in this day and age?
Hey, that's a great question, David. What I see right now is that you've got things happening at multiple layers simultaneously. So there is the last gasp by we'll call them the forces of darkness. Those entities and those organizations that would control humanity and not want to have humanity ascend into a golden age. So they're doing their best to make things miserable for everyone. And maybe it's just their last chance to have their type of fun. But also what is going on is that there is a way for, individuals to sign up to come into this world, and in their pre-life plan, they have specific things they sign up to do. And sometimes they sign up to be the quote unquote bad guy. Mm-hmm. And they are having the experience that their soul meant for them to have. And so for those of us who are on a different path and are looking to get to a higher place in life and in the ascension process, it is providing a background for humanity to grow and to learn and to decide, maybe I don't want all that war anymore. That war stuff is not for me. And one of the key things is if in your own personal life, you set the intention to not become focused on war and awful, not that you're going to ignore it or forget it, but just don't let it become the dominant thing that drives your emotions. Then that allows you to have the opportunity to grow on your own spiritual journey.
Thank you for sharing that. What's interesting, you use that term war. You're very familiar with the concept of war, having been in the military for 25 years. I want to get to that in just a moment and hear about your experience in the military. But In the Awaken Hearts chapter, you write about your spiritual journey, which started at a very young age. And so I would love for you to take us back to your earliest memories of spirituality in your life. What do you remember? What was happening? And how did that kind of morph or change as you got older?
The way that it started for me, David, was in our family. It was a very pro-Christian family and was in a denomination that was very Bible centric. And so they taught us to read the Bible and not just listen to what someone told us the answers were, but to find the answers ourselves. So from the youngest age, I can remember going to Sunday school and really enjoying it. It was something that just came natural for me. And so that's part of my soul's experience from previous lives before coming in here, is being very spiritually active and spiritually attuned to this message that you could find the teachings of Jesus. Let's just call it that. It could be the teachings of Buddha. It's all the same in a very significant way. So I was very pro kindness, compassion, mercy, treating others well. That didn't take any coercion. There was no, here, you sit down and learn this. I was like, all right, yeah, I got that. I got that. I got that. And so while I had some prophetic dreams, you could call them that, they were they were not super relevant or important. They would just be like, hey, there's something coming up in your life, and hey, here's a look at it in symbology. And so that never became a real big deal. Though the first time that really, at least from my perspective, was a big deal was a little bit before 9/11, but that's kind of a different part of the story. So very pro Jesus, pro kindness, pro love. And so big thing that happened for me was during the baptism ceremony. So I'm probably 11 at the time. And I come up out of the water in the Christian baptism ceremony, and I feel the unconditional love of Source just
Mm,
glowing all through me. And
hmm.
then from that point on, it was something where I was able to connect with the order of Melchizedek. I didn't recognize who it was at first. Kind of reading the Bible, I was like, all right, so you get connected after baptism. That must be the Holy Spirit. Well, kind of, sort of, but it was actually the order of Melchizedek.
And what is the Order of Melchizedek? Help us understand this.
This is an organization, a spiritual group that is actually not just beyond the earth or beyond our galaxy. It's multi-universal. And they're like a group of ascended masters, thousands of them, and they work for spreading the work of Source. And Melchizedek itself means my king is truth. So it's about having the highest level of light and fairness, and just all around trying to do that message of kindness, mercy, the things that humanity will live in 5D. That's what the Order of Melchizedek is about.
So you felt that connection when you came up out of the water.
Absolutely. And from that point on, I could ask a question of, is this a smart thing for me to do? And I would get an answer of yes, no, or maybe.
When
And
I
that
came
was,
up out of the water, I was thinking about the cake in the reception. Like that's what I was thinking about. You're like connecting with the Order of Melchizedek. I love this. Okay, so you said asking the question, is this, let's clarify that again? Is it a good idea or is it truth or
it would, I could ask anything that would come back with a yes or no answer. And
wow.
sometimes the answers would come back yes, no. And that would mean that, well, so you want to do this, all right, so you'll be successful doing this, but it won't be the outcome won't be what you want.
Mhm.
You'll get this done, but 3 months down the road, you won't like, or you won't have that thing that you really wanted to get out of it.
Did you tell your parents that you had this experience at all or did you kind of more keep it to yourself?
I believe I kept it to myself for the most part. Um, I'm not sure that there was anything in the discussions that came up after that where it opened up that type of discussion. That
Mhm.
wasn't the type of spirituality discussions I had with my parents.
Mhm. So as you continue to get older, how did that connection help you navigate life? How did that impact even career or relationship choices?
It was something that was useful as I got older teenager into college. Then the demands of life and being busy, going to college, starting out in the military, those distractions kind of. not really dampened it, but it was something where it wasn't fully exploited. It wasn't fully utilized.
Hmm.
And so perhaps the biggest place where it came up was I had met my second wife. We were deployed in Iraq at the time, and we were in a meeting together. And all of a sudden, they came in. Usually, they're just like, "Yes, no, this is how you could do it." They came in and said, "You go talk to her. Go talk to her right over there. That girl sitting there. You go talk to her." And it was something I went up to talk to her, and then after probably 6 or 7 months, we got married. That was one of the most dramatic times where they've really stood up and stood forward to give me specific guidance.
Amazing. Talk to me about your 25-year career in the military. Um, what did you do? How did that experience impact you on multiple levels? But of course, interested in how that impacted you spiritually as well.
Okay, for the first half of my military career, I was doing medical logistics. So that was support the hospitals. And the hospital that I was first assigned to, my first military assignment, was sent to Desert Storm. And so we got to sit at an airbase. It wasn't something where there was any direct combat right in the area, but we saw all the machines of war. We saw what was going to go and fall on the Iraqis. And obviously, it was a very powerful feeling to see that in action. So you see it up close as a plane could take off one after the other on the combat missions. And it was something where perhaps the bombs dropping, that was certainly not fun. There was lots of rockets and missiles that were sent our way because we were at an airbase that uh, was targeted. And that had a follow on effect. It wasn't directly after I got back, but maybe 6 months or a year later, I started getting depression, some PTSD symptoms. And I was able to work through it during that first part. This was my first combat deployment. And so it wouldn't really become bad again until much later in my career when I went to Iraq on the second combat deployment and spent a very long and eventful 15 months, which is much, looking back, it's too long to be in that type of environment. And I look at what happened in World War II and I wonder how people went through that and just went for years and years and years nonstop. And so
Mhm.
coming back out of Iraq, that became very challenging. A lot of headaches, a lot of challenges really focusing. Some of the PTSD was really bad coming out of that. Not that there was any direct and horrible incidents that I was involved in. It's just the totality of how much was going on and how many different things I had my fingers in. At that point, the logistics I was working was for all military units, not just the medical units. So I was following all the different combat units, making sure that they had the bullets, the food, the fuel, the trucks when they needed them, making sure that it was set up so that that would work for them. I was part of the team that did that.
Mhm. And during those 25 years, how did your spirituality either kind of come more to light or was it more pushed down? How did that play out for you?
It was a combination of both. It was never upfront, not as upfront as it was when I was younger, because it was all about the business and being busy and doing the work. But in small groups, I remember very specifically having discussions where, I would like to go to a small group discussion with 5 people, but to go to a church service at that point, I just had no interest in going to the church service and hearing some of the things that I didn't know if I really felt great about.
Mhm.
The military chaplains are awesome, just some of the finest people I've ever met, bar none. But they still had some of the dogma attached to what they were saying when they were putting out the big message. And so I can remember having a discussion with some of my peers, and there was the discussion of, well, the word of God, that's the thing that holds everything together. And then the small group, even the chaplain's like, well, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if that's how do we relate to that? And I was like, well, if you think about it, picked up a can of Coke. whatever it was. And I said, the word of God is like the metal in this can. If you don't have the structure of the universe, the physics is that everything just falls flat. The soda would go all over the table if you didn't have the can. And so that's kind of the same message that comes through in the teachings of Melchizedek, the order of Melchizedek. That's one of the mantras is word, I am word. Yeah. Lao Tzu called
You
it the
say it
Tao.
again. Did you say the word I am word?
Correct.
Word I am word. What does that mean?
What it comes down to is much like Lao Tzu would talk about the Tao, there is the everything, the source, the all that is, and the energy of source is holding everything together and is the baseline that connects not just all the people, but everything in existence. And so that word is the power of source.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes. Ah, Martin, I'm assuming after 25 years in the military, the structure and the way of kind of living in the military. I've never been in the military myself. My grandfather was 30 years in the Navy. Um, do you find how many years have you been out, by the way?
It is going on 11 years now.
11 years.
I'm past 10 years.
Yeah. Do you find that the structure and the way of kind of operating in the military, is that still part of your personality and daily flow, or has that receded at this point?
It's receded since my spiritual awakening. It was something where before I had my awakening, I still had some of the same habits and I really had some of the same um, desire for expectations, the desire to control events, to shape how things are going to go down. But I'll tell you this, David, after I retired, I didn't miss it. I was ready at that point. So I know some people have a hard time transitioning out. I was ready to transition out, but it also was a tough period. So didn't have, had other things to think about. I guess that's a
Sure,
better way to
sure.
put it.
One of the things that you talk about in your Awakened Hearts chapter is a 12-year dark night of the soul. That is a long time, Martin. My goodness. I just wanted to give you a hug when I read that. I was like, oh my gosh. How did that dark night of the soul begin for you? And how did you navigate that time? Was that, I assume that started when you were in the military? Did it continue afterwards? At what point did that come into your life?
Just happened to me within that first couple of years after I returned from Iraq. So I had met my second wife there. We'd gotten married, and I thought, hey, maybe things are going to be great. Well, then some of the inability to concentrate, the inability to communicate, the loss of being good at what I used to be good at was happening to me. So depression, PTSD, joint pain, headaches, all of these ailments just caught up to me. And it reached the point where I just couldn't operate the way I wanted to. And I was starting to have a lot of the anger. I wasn't a very good husband at that point. I wasn't a lot of fun to be around. And then I got lined up to go on another deployment to Afghanistan. And so this is about 2 or 3 years into it as I've started to really go into a downward spiral. And then in the preparation to go to Afghanistan, the bottom just fell out. And I reached the point where I was almost not able to function between the pain and the headaches, not being happy about anything. And that's when I got set up to retire. There was just no way to continue.
Hmm.
And it took a while after I retired to really come around. And it just was one of those things where, you know, at a certain point, maybe 10 years into the process, my higher self was sending me message, you know, audio words coming through that I needed to do more. And it took me a couple years until the actual awakening for me to get on it.
Hmm. You write in your chapter a very vulnerable story. I think it's probably one of the more vulnerable stories in the book about a vacation. And that became this catalyst to transition you out of this dark period of time. Would you mind just briefly telling us about what happened before the vacation and during the vacation.
All right, sure. This was coming up to that point where I had a plan. It was the family plan. We were going to drive from the Midwest out to California. It was going to be a road trip. I'm going to see some family in the Phoenix area and do a whole bunch of different things. Well, the plan just wasn't coming together. And so that anger and the inability to communicate properly or well, where there was not great communication, we reached a crescendo one day where we were just like, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to cancel this whole plan because it's just not coming together. And I felt bad about it because a lot of that was I hadn't made the reservations. I hadn't bought the tickets. I didn't have the hotel, didn't have the access to Disney lined up. And it was just looking like everything was going to fall apart.
And
So
this is you and your wife and a 5-year-old
that's
child?
correct.
Okay.
And so then I took a couple hours to calm down, went back in, said, well, let's give it a try. Got all the reservations, got all the things lined up, and we're able to start the trip and to get out and make it to Disneyland. That was one of the key steps along the way. Now, prior to leaving, my laptop had died. And so I had bought, it was like the third laptop that had died in the last 2 years. I was like, I need something better. I can't keep buying laptops. So I got a computer that I couldn't take with me. So that meant I wasn't going to be playing the games that had been, taking up my time and minimizing my free time. So I went into the vacation, spending more time with the family, and also looking at YouTube more when I had downtime. And YouTube was feeding me a lot of spiritual awakening things. I had found a couple of books that I liked. One of them is literally, the name of it is Word I Am Word. And there's also a book by a gentleman. He's got a series of books, but he talks about how there's actually aliens in the Bible. And I was like, well, duh, I've figured that out. You didn't have to tell me these were aliens. That's what I always figured that some of the explanation was. And so it started into that opening of, well, our history isn't right. The history we've been fed of how long man's been on Earth and our civilization just doesn't add up. And so that was part of the process where everything was just one little piece, one little piece. All of the things that didn't make sense started falling away. So get out to the vacation and you reach a point where you have to have some downtime because it's been a busy day. And in the downtime, I see this video where there's a young man who had a near-death experience. And in his near-death experience, he was confronted with, even though he'd been a great person, even though he had been for all the things that are good and, and for justice and for fairness, against racism, against discrimination, he had become hateful towards those things that he perceived as bad. And so that hate in his heart was a problem, and he couldn't stay on the other side. He had to come back and learn some more lessons. And I watched that and I was like, wow, that is me. I am at the point where I am so against this, that, or the other thing that I think in judgment. I'm in judgment of those things that I don't agree with. And so getting past that was like one of the two big pieces of my spiritual awakening. The other would happen after the vacation was over. Metatron shared with me the concept and the vision of everything is source.
Okay, wait. You're just dropping this like, yeah, vacation's over. Metatron just was sharing some information with me. Did you have a connection with Metatron prior to the vacation, or did they just show up?
The way I would put it is one of the characters out of the Bible that I always resonated with was Enoch. And so Enoch in the stories and then the book of Enoch is connected with Metatron. And so I would say coming out of my experience, probably like Daniel and Archangel Michael were the characters that I was the biggest fanboy of when I was young. But also Enoch and Metatron, I felt a connection to. I didn't fully understand the place that the archangels had at that time.
Mm-hmm.
They just seemed like mysterious beings doing mysterious things.
So at the end after the vacation. So let me clarify. You're watching this near death experience. Well, you're hearing him describe it, and the issue was the sense of judgment that he was bringing about the things that he did not like or approve of, and so that really was like a mirror for you. That's what I'm getting, right?
Absolutely. And not just the judgment piece, but having that hate in your heart.
Mm.
That's one of the key things is you should only have love in your heart. When you have love in your heart, then you won't judge.
Hmm. Okay, and then after the vacation, you had this message from Metatron. Did this come during a time of meditation, or just you were hanging out or watching a video, or how did this come to you?
For Metatron, when he's directly communicating with me, it's in dreams. And so I got a couple of books of the teachings of Metatron, but one of the things that the person who channeled the books talks about is when you're connecting with Metatron, if you're not ready, it's like putting 50,000 volts through your light bulb in your house. It's just not going to work.
Hmm.
And so he was able to give me some very clear message. And then the message that I was talking about were all the source. In the dream, I saw this space and there was Metatron standing there, and back behind him to the side was Source. And he was showing me how this is something that you're going to have an epiphany on. And then the next day I had an epiphany of everything is Source. And so one of the big parts of that that's important is if everything is Source, what that means is, David, you're Source, I'm Source, our viewers here are Source. So you are me, I am you, and we are we. And when you take that perspective of understanding that everyone is part of the same team, it's no longer duality. There's no you and me. We're all part of the same team and we're intimately connected.
Mm, yes. What are the ramifications of actually believing that and receiving it?
The first thing that came for me was because this was leading up to the elections in 2024. I had one party
Good,
that I thought
good
maybe,
timing.
yeah, it was perfect. Everything in perfect timing. I had one party that I thought maybe was on the right track, and one party that I knew was not on the track that I was a fan of. Not seeing them as good and bad, getting away from the duality of this is right, this is wrong, and seeing that there are people who are having their own experience. And so they are all for doing something. And maybe I don't agree with that. And what Metatron teaches is I don't have to like them. I don't have to, have them over for dinner or do anything with them. So I see that over there, and that's not for me. I want this that's over here. But I'm not going to send hate or scorn or get angry about the stuff that I don't like. In fact, what I'll do is I'll send love to them in the hopes that it'll soften their hearts and maybe they'll see things more my way. And that also comes with the understanding that, while I'm sending them love, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just absolutely wrong. So I'm sending love to people who deserve to get love, not scorn. And then that way I can feel better when I realize, well, yeah, I had that wrong. So I'm glad I wasn't talking trash about them.
Hmm. One of the things that you write, you say, and this is during the realization about loving and forgiving, you say, don't judge, don't hate. There is no room for hate in your heart, only room for love. Try to understand others, even if it means their beliefs and your beliefs are fundamentally different. That's okay. It's it also means you don't have to try and change anyone's views. So, as you have taken on this new way of seeing the world, yourself, other people, what has what has that done to you internally? Like, how has that impacted your internal world, and then how has that impacted the way that you are speaking and acting externally?
It changes everything. And so the first part is all of that anger that I had before the awakening is just gone and dissipated. And so what that allows me to do is to have a focused interaction with other people. So if I go to the grocery store, I am not worried about, well, am I going to get in this line or is someone cutting me off? Are they in my way? I just try to have a pleasant experience with everyone that I interact with. And it also happens like when you're driving. That used to be quite an interesting experience when I was still very angry being out on the road, especially driving around in Washington, D.C. It was some challenging driving. And so there'd be a lot of, you and bad things being said to the other drivers. Now I understand that if I see driving that I don't like, it's not for me to get mad at that person. If I send love to them instead of hate, maybe they'll drive better. But also, I'll drive better. That's the most important thing is I'll drive better because I'm not distracted being mad about the way they're driving.
Mm-hmm. How has this shift in your life? And this is relatively recently, right, Martin? Like these things that are unfolding. This has been in the last year or two.
Right. I'm at about the 11-month mark on my full awakening.
Mm-hmm. How has this impacted your relationship with your wife, with your uh, young child? I know you've got some older children as well. How has this impacted your relationship with them? What are they thinking and experiencing?
The biggest thing is that because I'm not angry, I'm able to have a focused time with them. I'm able to be pleasant. I'm able to be caring. I'm not as distracted. I don't want to play video games all the time anymore. And so our interactions are much more pleasant. And obviously, my wife's a big fan of that. That's, that scored good points on the spiritual awakening around the household. My older kids also, we have been able to overcome some of the differences we had where maybe we had differing views on which political party and which group of people we should give our time and attention to. Now we're able to find common ground.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me about your relationship now. You write about this a bit in the chapter, your relationship with Jesus, with Metatron, Kuan Yin. How do you see these entities? How do you interact with them? What role do they play in your life?
At this point, Jesus is still someone I admire very much, is a being that I have the highest respect for as an ascended master. When I went through the process of the spiritual awakening, one of the things that happened for me very directly is that my view of religion fundamentally changed. I now see religion as a container. It's something that helps people, helps humans as they transition out of 3D up into a higher level of understanding. It gives them a way to see spirituality. I see life and the universe very differently now, where I no longer have this concept of everything has to be this God or that God or the ultimate God. And so I see Jesus as a tremendous ascended master and a great source of inspiration and assistance. One thing that he directly helps me on is working with my macabre, which is the light body. It's one of the big teachings of Metatron. Um, and the way that I perceive Jesus or Kuan Yin, who is basically for the Buddhist community, their equivalent of Mother Mary in Christianity. And I think that's probably a pretty good analogy. I perceive a lot of things very multidimensional. And so with my macabre activated, I'm able to travel through the cosmos to different places, different times and spaces. And so I can meet directly with the Ascended Masters or with Kuan Yin. But especially for Kuan Yin, it's almost like I'm channeling her all the time. And so I'm able to speak with her directly anytime that I wish to.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I'm curious about is, when I think about religion, I love that word container that you use. It's like this is a container that people can kind of understand. There's a certain dogma, a way of like, this is right and wrong. This is the process. All of these different things. Most religions have that, which in my mind, as somebody who's probably ignorant on the subject, Martin, that's kind of how I see the military, where it's like there's protocol, certain ways of doing things that can be more like a formal structure that kind of lines up in my mind with religion. And so oftentimes, I guess I would see an alignment there of like the right, wrong, not right, wrong, good or bad, but I guess a protocol or a process. And I'm seeing your mind kind of step outside of that whole concept of not necessarily right or wrong, but like a protocol or a strict way of doing things. Does that surprise you in terms of like your mind to like thinking more of like an expansive way as opposed to what could be considered maybe a more rigid way of seeing life or spirituality? I don't know. Does any of that make sense to you?
Oh, it does. That's a great question, David. What I see is that the military itself is very structured, super structured.
Has to be, of course.
Yeah. And what that allows, if you have the inclination or the interest, it gives you like a framework or a basis to work from.
Mhm.
And so as long as you don't color too far outside of the lines, you're able to do what you need to do.
Mhm.
And I would say for spirituality, one of the things that is important when we talk about religion being inside the container or outside of the container is being able to pick out what are the key aspects. And so if you can identify the things that apply in all phases of life, not just within the religion container, then you can get the most out of it.
Mhm.
And if you're a person who needs a structure, then that's great for that person.
Mhm.
I would never say anything down about the religion. And Metatron teaches that basically all the religions are equally valid. And
Mhm.
for the people in them, they're gaining value and life experience. And that's what their soul needs to do.
Mhm. Uh, you spend a great deal of time on reading and taking in content. Do you it seems like, I mean, having just, had this experience 11 months ago, how much time are you investing in your own spiritual growth and development?
That's been pretty much unlimited, Dave. I spend 6 to 12 hours a day reading, meditating, and I've had a number of programs and mentorships that I've been in. Several of them are really outstanding, and that does help me immensely. I've built a small library. It's getting to the point where Kindle no longer works on my phone because the library simply is too big.
Wonderful. I love just your passion for growth and passion for learning. It is so beautiful. Um, you end your chapter with this statement. You say, "A message of hope. Earth's dark night of the soul is going on right now. Greatness comes out the other side. Heaven on earth, we can have it now!" Exclamation point. How can we have heaven on earth right now?
All right, that's a fantastic question, David. I think that may be my favorite yet. The way it works is it's all about your personal mentality, the way that you embrace challenge, the way you embrace life, the way you embrace the universe. So if you are full of love in your heart, if you have positivity, if you have a great outlook on life, and you're ready to deal with the challenges that come up, because there's going to be plenty coming up in the near future, then you're able to go through the process and not let any challenges in the 3D world bring you down. As you're creating your own experience, and people have a tremendous amount of ability to, to shape and change their experience and their reality. And as you choose to be positive, as you choose to enjoy each day, then you're creating for yourself heaven on earth. One of the follow on things that happens is as you raise your frequency and the amount of light that's in you, then the dark things, the things that are unpleasant, have a harder time interacting with you. It's obviously a co creation world where there's several billion people here. Everyone has a vote, everyone has inputs, but you're able to shape more of what goes on in your life than you actually realize. At least that's the way it was for me. I had no idea at the beginning how much input I had into shaping the world around me.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right. So, Martin, if people want to follow you and your work, because I know you're beginning to support others on their own journeys of awakening and ascension as well, where can people connect with you and follow you?
Okay, on my website, larimardragon.com, there's also Instagram, and YouTube, Martin Melchizedek.
Wonderful. And what are the things that people can expect as they begin to follow you? Like, what are your hopes and dreams for your work and as you support people?
Very to the point, especially my initial work is about helping humanity and helping those people who are just like I did last summer, going through their spiritual awakening, helping to ease people to understand things. And very specifically, the work that I do is focused on taking all of the esoteric, the very technical and spiritual pieces of the awakening and the universe, and making them very exoteric, making it easy for anyone to understand so that they don't have to build their own library like I have. Just give them some information that they can use in their daily life in a practical way. And that's my focus, at least for the first couple of years that I'm working.
I love it. Martin, it is great to see you again. And I love just your authenticity and sharing your story. It's so inspiring. And I'm excited to how things will continue to unfold for you as you support others. So thank you, Martin, for what you're doing in our world. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me on today, Dave. This has been great.
Thanks for listening to the Awaken Magazine podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and our other conversations, would you mind taking a moment to leave a 5-star review and maybe even a comment on Spotify or Apple Podcasts? That's one of the ways that you can give back to the show and help us reach more people. And of course, feel free to share the episode with a friend. And if you're not already on our email list, we send out an inspiring email every Monday morning full of articles and interviews. Just head on over to awakenedmagazine.com and click subscribe and join for free. Our hope is that all the resources we share will help our world continue awakening to love.